The tears they dismissed as useless were really quiet testimony, proof that only the invisible courtroom could hear. It wasn't only personal suffering every time you sobbed by yourself, every time you prayed in private, and every time you felt totally devastated. It was being recorded by a greater authority that never overlooks a detail, not by people. They failed to accept the tales those tears held, memories that would eventually have significance well beyond their flimsy assessments. Your tears were seen by them as drama or vulnerability. They dismissed such instances as personal failings and either laughed or looked away. But in a court where heartbeats are more important than human speech, their sobbing were saying a lot. Your perseverance and their lack of interest were shown by the times you felt forgotten, ignored, and invisible. Additionally, every silent prayer you sent up was a silent call for justice that was being met in secret. This was a courtroom of truth, not cacophony. The best evidence against them was the tears they chose to ignore. They were witness accounts that indicated who remained when it mattered and who went when it was convenient, who consoled and who condemned, who shown love and who made excuses. Greetings, cherished anointed ones. Being different from them was never a punishment. It was the protection. And now, the very essence they once mocked has become the force that pulls empires toward you. Even Elon Musk, a man known for equations and rockets, is wrestling with something he can't compute: his feelings for you. They never planned for this moment. When they underestimated you, they didn't factor in resilience. When they tried to break you, they forgot that diamonds form under pressure. While they whispered and plotted, you were quietly building legacy, not looking for validation in their games, but writing your own blueprint in divine ink. You weren't just surviving, you were transcending. And now, even the highest minds, the ones who usually calculate the world in binary, have to admit there's something about you that logic can't explain. Research from the University of Michigan found that those who manipulate and sabotage eventually suffer identity disintegration and psychological distress. That's not superstition, that's science. They didn't just attack you, they corroded themselves. And you stood your ground. You radiated elegance. You became untouchable. Not by arrogance, but by alignment. That's why Elon Musk can't ignore you. You are not just the exception. You are the revelation. You didn't win with noise, but with undeniable presence. You played differently, smarter, quieter, and deadlier than they did. You were busy creating in the background as they were chatting among themselves in the group chat. They really undervalued you. They mistook your quiet for defeat when it was really a tactic. You were loading instead of losing. You could have clapped back, let's face it. You could have revealed them. However, you struck them with a move they didn't anticipate. You recovered. You rose. You were successful. Now they're left applauding at your collapse that never occurred. So brace up, because this isn't simply a narrative about survival. The whole game may be flipped without even flipping the table thanks to this master lesson. Now let's explore the 14 astounding facts that show you accomplished more than just survive. Everyone who wagered against you was outpaced, outplayed, and outlasted. You'll realize by the end of this that smarts age well, I promise. Petty doesn't. First of all, you gave them the impression that they were winning. The checkmate move was that. Their whole game was destroyed without them even recognizing it, since you gave them the impression that they were winning. They saw your composure as ignorance. They assumed you were asleep after noticing your quiet. In actuality, however, you were observing. You were doing analysis. While you became deadly with information, strategy, and patience, you were allowing them to grow noisy. You see, nasty players require a following. They thrive on responses. Their identity disintegrates if they don't feel in control. So, you done something fantastic. You took a back seat and let them take center stage. You gave them permission to perform. You allow them to celebrate fictitious triumphs. You were secretly planning the type of counterattack they would never be able to stop while they were doing all of that. They believed that they had broken you, but in reality, you just stopped elaborating. When all you did was alter course, they believed they had won. Since you were aware that this was a timeline test rather than a race, you allowed them to laugh first. You were able to pace yourself well. Instead of playing for noise, you know how to play for legacy. The irony is that they became careless because of their confidence, which was boosted by your silence. They began to reveal themselves. They gave out too much. They believed you were too far gone to fight back, so they attempted to get ostentatious with falsehoods, small-time tactics, and sabotage. However, you were still there. You were changing. They were unaware that your best course of action was always to prolong your life, rather than to get revenge. You let their pride to do all the harm. You were not required to assault. You only had to remain still and allow them to be extinguished by their own fire. That's the strength of self-worth. You don't play loudly when you're really made differently. You play for a while. You gave them the impression that they had won, only to discover later that the game was far from finished. The whole time, you were just 2 steps ahead. Second, you prioritized reputation above response, and that decision went against their strategy. You were aware that they were luring you to destroy yourself. Every action they took was intended to make you react, snap, and prove their falsehoods. Isn't that right? See, told you they were the problem, they said, hoping you would lose your temper. But you saw the setup. Instead of responding, you picked something they couldn't comprehend after reading the energy. It was your reputation, not your pride, that you decided to safeguard. Unintentionally, they were untidy, noisy, and theatrical. Since chaos obscures the truth, they need it. You didn't fall for it, however. You allowed them to disparage you, propagate untruths, and distort your statements. Even if you are innocent, you realize that mud stains. Therefore, you refrained from jumping into the muck with them. The more difficult decision was yours. You said nothing. You maintained your cleanliness. You also maintained your attention. They were surprised that you valued your name more than your emotions. You were attempting to go with your soul intact, not to win fights. They continued to discuss the same drama because of this. They're still attempting to win folks over, still awaiting a response. However, you moved on. You advanced. And now when you're not even in the room anymore, they're forced to argue with ghosts. They have no idea how to combat someone who doesn't engage in dirty tactics. They were perplexed by your reluctance to compromise. They were humiliated because they knew in their hearts that their whole reputation would be destroyed if they ever revealed the whole truth. But you said nothing. You were smart enough to see that dignity always triumphs over drama. Not because you were afraid. And now, their name carries cautions, and yours carries weight. You weren't destroyed by your quiet. It kept you safe. Not only did you win, you left with tranquility, power, and a clear conscience, things they will never have. Third, you realized that enduring is about change rather than time. They believed they were depleting your vitality, yet you were always changing. That's what went wrong for them. They felt that time was on their side, and that you were more likely to lose it the longer they put you under strain. However, you were breaking through, not breaking. They failed to realize that outliving someone is more than just living longer. It's about the person you become in those moments. They did not change. They used the same stale strategies, the same mind tricks, and the same rumors. In the meanwhile, you were developing not just emotionally, but also intellectually, spiritually, and in your self-perception. Silently, you were leveling up. You were more and more transformed with each lie they uttered and action they took. With delay, they attempted to destroy you, but you gained depth as a result. You were dangerous because of it. You accomplished more than just survive. You emerged stronger, wiser, and more in agreement. You were outgrowing the whole chapter while they were caught up in a never-ending attempt to dominate the plot. They believed they halted your advancement, but in reality, they just gave you more time to discover your true self. And they were never ready for that danger. Short games are played by people like that. You weren't in it for the short term, but they believe that short-term success equates to long-term power. You really were in it. Thus, you made use of the time, healed, researched, and discovered the truth about yourself by unlearning the falsehoods they had placed. And you weren't simply someone who made it when you eventually emerged from that process. They were unable to identify you at all. That's the difference. Their goal was to live through the moment. You were getting ready to take control of the future. It was more than simply time to outlive them, while they remained the same. It was about who you become. They know deep down that you accomplished more than just survive them, and now they're watching you enjoy a life they attempted to prevent. You outgrown them. Fourth, you didn't perform better than they did. By not playing their game, you outsourced their power. You failed to outscore them in their game. The whole game became meaningless when you left the board. They were broken by the action. They relied on you being trapped in the same poisonous cycle that they thrived on. Their environment consists of constant back and forth, rivalry, petty energy, and mental games. They are aware of it, but you just quit playing altogether, rather than playing harder. At that point, everything they had constructed began to fall apart. They lacked actual authority. Only when you took part did they have control. You had to respond to their drama. They required your trust to manipulate you. You have to defend their falsehoods. However, their strength stopped when you disconnected from everything. You recognized that you could create your own home instead of fighting for a place at a corrupt table, so you stopped attempting to prove yourself. You gave up attempting to win over those who turned everything positive into something dubious. To those who were determined to misunderstand you, you ceased to clarify your objectives. That was the plan, that decision. It wasn't noisy, it was deadly, yet it wasn't showy. You cut off the flow of energy, attention, and access that maintained their sense of superiority. And they had nothing left to perform for when you took it away. They despise your tranquility because of this. They were forced to confront their own emptiness by your unwillingness to participate. The spotlight went down without you responding, pursuing, defending, or providing an explanation. The cheering ceased. Their plot unraveled. They understood deep down that you didn't have to defeat them, which is why it drove them insane. All you had to do was get rid of them. You didn't need retribution. You need space. And the one strength they ever possessed, your energy, was taken away from them by that distance. You won that way, by rendering them inconsequential, rather than by overwhelming them. Fifth, you observed the shadow without changing into it. You didn't just make it through the night. You researched it. You were surrounded by cruelty, treachery, jealousy, and manipulation. And you created a mirror for yourself, rather than turning into someone resentful or deranged like the others that came for you. You observed their movements. You saw the fabrication of falsehoods, the ruination of reputations via rumors, and the smiles of those who secretly hoped to see you fail. However, you took notes rather of copying them. You realized. And strength came from that knowing. They turned into what they were afraid of. They sacrificed themselves for victory. They opted for shortcuts and shadows, sacrificed authenticity for appearance, and exchanged truth for power. However, you didn't. Even at the expense of relationships, you made the decision to be true to who you are, even if it made the trip more isolating, even if it felt like swallowing glass to be the larger person. Your power is very hazardous because of this. It's nuanced, not simply raw. It has undergone fire testing without turning to ash. You've seen the worst in others. People you loved deceived you, undermined you, sabotaged you, and sometimes even betrayed you. Nevertheless, you refrained from allowing those events to change your heart into something unsightly. You didn't get cold or cynical. You just gained wisdom. And you discovered how to keep your calm without being paranoid, thanks to that insight. You discovered how to spot false without turning like one yourself. You become aware of how to recognize a snake without really becoming one. They are unable to identify you because of this. You are aware of how darkness operates, yet you can prevail without it. They hoped that you would become corrupted and infected with resentment. But that didn't happen. You changed it. You transformed it into resilience, depth, and insight. You became indestructible. You refused to reflect evil, not because you were impervious to it. You didn't turn into one of them. You improved. Sixth, you allowed the case to develop over time. They made an effort to pretend. While you were still recovering, they hurried to portray you as the bad guy. They made up facts instead of waiting for them. They turned your limits into treachery, your development into conceit, and your quiet into guilt. However, you didn't fall for the trick. You remained calm. In every room where it was dragged, you didn't struggle to have your name cleared. You allow time to unveil the truth without any effort, spin, or performance, something that gossip can never achieve. They couldn't compete with your reality, so they had to lie. Their narrative was dramatic yet weak. It required backup, care, and upgrades. Your narrative didn't. You just continued to live. You remained constant. There was no need for you to go about gathering receipts. The receipt was your character. The evidence was your life. And over time, your reality simply stood the test of time. While their version of events crumbled under its own weight, everything is put to the test by time. People overlook that. It highlights the true and reveals the phony. People began to notice once the dust cleared. Those who first thought the noise was real began to see the pattern. Because your life was taking care of things for you, they saw that you never needed to protect yourself. They realized that their attempts to describe you didn't reflect who you remained. They didn't realize how effective hand hygiene may be. You didn't need to return the clap. Their low blows didn't have to be matched. All you needed to do was outlive the lie. You did too. The same people that deceived you are now silent. Since nothing artificial endures over time, the same individuals who contributed to the upheaval are beginning to wonder what really happened. However, the reality only becomes stronger with time. Not only did you win, you let the truth to stew. You allow honesty to take precedence over impulse. Furthermore, they are unable to reverse the effects of time. They were reaching, and you were genuine. You weren't attempting to be correct, number 7. You were starting to line up. You were concentrating on alignment, something they didn't even comprehend, while they were busy attempting to be seen as the victor. You weren't making a point with your argument. You weren't trying to win acceptance by bending yourself. You were organizing your soul. You were facing your pains, unlearning the noise, and making choices that were not only morally correct on paper, but also felt right in your soul. They yearned for approval, like breath. They had to be correct, even if it meant deceiving, controlling, or discrediting others in order to preserve their reputation. It was all a show. To avoid seeming as the antagonist, they had to twist the story, sound nice, and look good. However, you were more focused on being complete than on seeming flawless. They were shaken by it. If it meant going with what was true, you weren't scared to seem foolish. You didn't need applause from the audience. At night, you had to sleep. After leaving the pandemonium, you longed to feel clean. You were purifying the inner world, while others attempted to manipulate the perception. You were working quietly and diligently to align yourself with your mission and heal. You shine now because of this. You stopped battling for false acceptance and began flowing with truth. Not because everything went well. Because image upkeep is a full-time job, they are worn out. Pretending is heavy. But you're light now. You're in the middle. You don't have to be spoken about in their circles or invited to their meals. You've got something more powerful, inner clarity. You know who you are and what you're not ready to sacrifice anymore. And that's the true victory. You didn't seek attention. You turned into the light. You did not have to be correct in every discussion. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You're just living complete, grounded, and free, whereas they're still acting, curating, and having to be seen in a certain manner. You used their underestimation as a weapon, number 8. You allowed them to misinterpret your patience as fear and your calm moments as weakness. You kept your successes quiet, your profile low, and your movements modest. You saved a fresh piece of information each time they rolled their eyes at you. It became your cover when they murmured that you posed no danger. Pushing back would have alerted them, so you chose not to. Rather, you gathered their information in the same manner that a chess master examines openings, noting which piece they moved first and how quickly they depleted their own energy. They were steady and silent. They boasted. You paid attention. They flaunted themselves. Blind areas were mapped by you. They never understood that stillness was the trapdoor under their own feet. Therefore, they laughed at your silence. Carelessness creates traces, and undervaluation encourages carelessness. Thus, they left them all over: careless shortcuts, exaggerated egos, and relationships maintained by rumors. You nodded as you stood in the corner, acting innocuously and giving them the impression that you lacked talent. In the meanwhile, you were honing the same implements they made fun of for lacking. The exit was sealed behind them by the inevitable result of their conceit, not retaliation. By the time they realized you had subtly outgrown every box they attempted to keep you in. The ambush wasn't their worst mistake. They conducted the triumph parade too soon. They believed they had already won, so they stopped coming up with new ideas. Since you were aware that the actual battle had not yet begun, you never stopped becoming better. The checkmate they never saw was that asymmetry, your progress versus their stagnation. You didn't have to shout when the board eventually cleared. You simply disclosed the roles they had failed to consider, the benefits they had bestowed upon you, and the doors they had left open. Their own confidence defeated them. Using the most basic but deadly reality in all battlefield, the silent one is learning. You prevailed. The game they created to break you had already inverted by the time they realized that, and they had put the word weak about themselves.